appointment will be a panel called Experiencing the Bridge. The panel will be led by Jacopo Barigazzi. This is a journalist from Newsweek. And will attend the panel Randy Mitchell, U.S. Department of Commerce, that I would ask you to join the stage. Marco Marinucci, that I believe you know pretty well. And Matteo Daste. Matteo Daste is the founder of BAIA, the Business America Italian Association, and is a partner at Buchalter Nehmer. Now it's my time to shut up and pass the ball to Jacopo Barigazzi. Thank you very much.
So I would start with, I don't know whether it's ready or not. We got a slide. I don't know whether you can show it. There was a slide. I hope it's ready. If it's not, okay, this is it. This comes from a last research by Global Insight on the impact of venture capital-backed companies in the US. The figures are pretty astonishing, but just to be accurate, these figures cannot be confused with the Eurostat figures on the impact of venture capital in Europe, because these figures here are they try to work out the amount of money and of jobs created by venture capital-backed companies. As the usual figures we see here in Europe, the Eurostat figures on venture capital, they just take in consideration the amount of money these funds have. So that two very different sets of figures that have not to be confused. And but I will start from these amazing figures. These figures accounted for 11% of the private sector employment and represented the equivalent of the 21% of the U.S. GDP. The same report also states that the U.S. venture capital industry has invested approximately since the 70s 456 billion in more than 27,000 companies. So if you are a European, don't get too depressed. It's I would then immediately start my first question for Randy. Randy, all of this, how is this model exportable? Sorry if I go straight to the point, but it seems that governments across all over the globe, from Malaysia to Canada to the UK, are trying to replicate the venture capital model. But so far, the histories of success are very few. So what my question is this. This is an event, is something that is happening in Silicon Valley, in the US, and how can this become like a structure, something that you can export? Is it possible to export this model?
Well, of course, that's the billion-dollar, if not $100 billion question. And first of all, I would very much, as my first remarks, to thank the hosts and Marco and the Mind the Bridge Foundation for inviting me here. I arrived from Washington this morning, so if I make any mistakes, I'm going to blame it on jet lag. But to your question, if you take, for example, the Israeli model that has been in place and think about the way that the government structured the venture capital industry in Israel, and then with the Yozma funds, and then stepped aside after a certain number of years, 5 years, and then completely moved aside and allowed the private sector to operate freely within the venture capital sector after having been catalyzed by the Israeli government. That's a model, but there perhaps are different ways. I mean, the other way would be to entice perhaps U.S. venture capitalists, perhaps U.S. venture capitalists of Italian heritage, to come back to Italy and to create venture capital funds, perhaps with maybe some degree of help from the state, perhaps some level of matching funds, but most definitely the private sector needs to be able to raise the funds, to deploy the funds here. but maybe there should be a campaign to entice some of the Italian entrepreneurs, the successful Italian immigrants to the United States to come back to bring their knowledge, their operational knowledge that they gained in the United States, to bring that back and apply it here on the Italian market. Of course, one of the problems with venture capital, whether it's in the United States or Europe or Singapore, it doesn't matter. Nowadays, there's those venture capitalists that really are either from Wall Street types, finance backgrounds, perhaps MBAs, sorry for the MBAs in the audience, but who may not have had operational experience working in the factory or working sales, or really getting their hands dirty by rolling up their sleeves. And if you take some of the perhaps U.S. venture capitalists who have actual operational experience, have them come to Italy working with either Italian funds as co-investment, syndication, or perhaps establishing a fund here with help from the Italian state, this operational experience is going to be extremely helpful to the Italian startups as they expand, not only Italy and in Europe, but obviously back to the United States. So there are the different ways. I mean, again, the Israeli model, or perhaps working to entice greater syndication, greater co-investments between U.S. venture capitalists and Italian venture capitalists together investing in Italian portfolio companies.
Okay, the following up on your answer, for those of you who don't know, the Israeli model is a model, there is this fund called Yotzma, which, if I'm not wrong, in Hebrew means initiative. It was founded in 1993, and now, just reading some figures on the success of that model, last year, Israel, a country of just over 7 million people, has attracted as much venture capital as France and Germany combined. And the way of saying in Israel, when you talk about Yotzma, is that before Yotzma there was nothing. So, but the unfortunate thing is that every time we discuss about these things, we end up talking about Israelis. It seems like there is no other successful model in outside the U.S. Is this right?
Well, I mean, there are emerging successful models. Well, I guess it depends on the definition of success. But I mean, if you look, certainly Australia, the UK have well-developed venture capital models. But here again, they're not creating billion-dollar companies that are having blockbuster IPOs on Nasdaq. So it depends really what we're trying to achieve. But you're correct. I mean, it's a very difficult to create the comprehensive ecosystem to allow for the venture capital sector to grow.
Thanks, Marco, I wanted to ask you something about Mind the Bridge, because, first of all, are you happy the way things are unfolding today?
Well, what do you say? You happy? Yes. So I'm actually happy if people are happy in general. So we put a lot of energy. It's not just me, there's a bunch of people that work here. So far, so good.
And because there is a line that I read when you were talking, when you talk about the way you set up Mind the Bridge, I'm quoting you, and you say, I got inspired when involved in a business plan competition and mentoring project in Africa. We're very close to Africa here, aren't we? It's, what do you think? I mean, in 2 years, you have achieved already a lot with Mind the Bridge. And what do you think at this point is going to be the next target for you? And what do you think can be the impact of this kind of talks, as you were saying before, to have now a kind of return of people from the Silicon Valley? It seems that we are getting into the second stage. Before people went there, now something is coming back.
Yeah, I think that also President Marchetti this morning mentioned that to be successful, this model is based on a long-term model. The Africa, the impression that I had when I was in Ghana, and that was not too long ago, it was 2007. I was working with actually the Google Foundation, Google.org. That was the first project where actually we're investing on entrepreneurship, and there was something very similar. Well, the one thing that I saw there was remarkable is the fact that if a project is well organized and can literally change an ecosystem, that can have an impact of this data on a GDP of a full country. So, our dream in long term is to be relevant as well. So the next stage, I think we started as a work in progress, especially in the field of entrepreneurship, but the idea is to try to reach out to the masses. So to change the mindset that things can be done, that there are opportunities. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. We need to change the ecosystem that we have had for quite some time here. But I think that things are moving that way. So the one thing that I would mention, though, is even more than the ecosystem, the problem that we see coming and facing every day is coming actually from a statistics that my friend Richard Bowley, that a lot of you know because was the person that was the core and the mind of the Partnership for Growth, showed a few times. Is a statistics taken by a question by some agency, and the question was the following: what do you think is your chances to manage your future time? So the idea is that how much you think you're in control of your future, and that was a question that was asked throughout the whole world, more or less. So the answer was astonishing. So the U.S., and that was a question for people in the 30s, more or less, as an age range. And the answer from Americans was 73% of the people, of the young people, thought that they are in control of their future. Yes. So they think that they can change their future, right? And we are not talking about entrepreneurship. We're talking about what you think about, yourself, being entrepreneurs of yourself. Well, the bottom line, the other side of the range, guess who was there? Yes, that country. So Italy was exactly the opposite. 22% of the people, of Italian folks in that age range, think they're in control, meaning that 70+% think that they have no control in their future. So I think that's after Italy, there was probably a couple of countries where there is a war. So that specific statistic, I think, is the core of the problem that we want to handle here. So changing literally a mindset is even more difficult than changing an ecosystem.
I would just really quite quickly like to say I was in Stockholm in September doing a panel very similar to this, but it was a little bit more defined, and we were doing a policy panel. And what you just said struck me for the first time when there was a young Swede in the audience, and it was quite moving. He was actually moved to tears in explaining how through his transition into sort of this entrepreneurial environment, for the first time in his life, he was in control, and that others weren't controlling him. And I had never registered it until you shared with us the statistic. It's fascinating to me. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah,
it's awful. Yes,
it's fascinating but awful. Yes,
it's but also if you see it was an Italian, the guy who actually sold Bing to Microsoft, and I was expecting this news to be everywhere, in every newspaper, in news bulletins instead of the lotto. I haven't seen it around, and probably it's a part of the price we pay also for being the second oldest country in the world, but Japan, who is the first country in terms of old age of its population, has a completely different approach to technology. So that's not the problem. It's not the age of the population. It's the culture. It's very. But anyway, moving to Matteo. Matteo, I read an interview with you where you were explaining the model you used to set up BAIA, which is, I guess, is also a kind of game with the word "bay," if I'm not wrong.
Right.
If I can,
right.
Okay. And you say, I would like to ask you first of all if you can tell us what it is exactly, the BAIA.
Sure.
And secondly, you say in one of the interviews I read, you say that it is inspired by the Silicon Valley networks in terms of proponing an associative model of the 21st century. what does it mean, a society model of the 21st century?
Okay, basically, BAIA was born at the end of 2005 to provide an association for the Italian business community in the San Francisco Bay Area to meet. And then from then it expanded into a larger network with also a presence actually in Italy. And many of you are familiar with BAIA, in fact, I think. But the point of BAIA is that in Silicon Valley, the network is really the key platform over which innovation develops. Innovation is viewed as an equation with two components. On one hand, you have technology. On the other hand, you have the market. So the network is a platform that allows technology to meet, market-driven demand, meaning, investors or for technology people to understand what the market demands and what applications can be, turned into companies. So you really need to have the network to enable this kind of dialogue. Otherwise, you cannot have innovation. And if you only have technology, but technology doesn't speak to the market or doesn't understand the market, then you can have innovation. And so with BAIA, our mission was to create a network specifically geared for the Italian technology community, starting in the Bay Area, but not necessarily limited there anymore, so that that community can have a platform over which to enter into contact with the business community.
But can I ask you something? What other national communities are doing in Silicon Valley? For example, the Germans have organized GABA. Mm-hmm. And what are the other national communities doing in order to set up networks?
Oh, they are doing similar things. I mean, the idea of BAIA, in all truth, was not a new idea. It was basically, modeled after some of these other networks. Like you mentioned, GABA is the German-American Business Association. The French had a similar association, the British, the Swiss. And, and the reason why they had this association is not in a vacuum, but as I said, was, because that's how, Silicon Valley works. That's how the networks are the basis over which, technology people speak with investors, and investors come into contact with engineers and entrepreneurs. You need both components of the equation in order to really create innovation. Otherwise, if you only have capital but no technology, then there's nowhere to invest. If you only have technology but no capital or no exits, then you can't have innovation. This is an important really point. I think, listening to the discussion this morning, one point that I think emerged and one frustration was that from the panel of the entrepreneurs was that despite technology ideas, it's difficult to procure investment. But I think it's not not random. The real question is whether for an investor is if I invest in the company, is there going to be an exit? Meaning, is there going to be somebody down the line who's going to buy that company so that I can make money on my investment? If the answer is no, then there's a problem. There's never going to be a big investor community. You can have all the technology ideas that you want, but if you can't really have a demand from the market, then it's going to be very hard to find investments.
I'd just like to add a derivative of this sort of BAIA, and as you asked about the efforts of other nations, there are other network groups such as that, but also other states who support their entrepreneurs coming into Silicon Valley, such as Denmark, the Netherlands, Spain. Certainly the Danes and the Dutch are very aggressive in bringing in entrepreneurs, missions, delegations, where there's even a permanent delegate from Denmark and from Holland that are in Silicon Valley, working constantly to...
A permanent state delegate, so it's the state that sent...
That's correct. They actually are employed by the federal government of Denmark or of the Netherlands and work in Silicon Valley to link the entrepreneurs from those nations into the Silicon Valley network, whether it's venture capitalists or procurement or sales or recruiting, whatever the case might be. So
Matteo, sorry, I'm sure it's plenty of Italian state officials do the same thing.
Yeah, no. Sorry,
no, they're not, but honestly, I don't think
that...
Honestly, I don't think that's a problem. I mean, it would be good to have. it's even better if it's run by a group of people that are passionate about it and put their face out. So that's how BAIA started. That's the same spirit that inspired also Man the Bridge. So of course we don't expect such activities as France is doing, as Israel. Israel built the whole thing at the beginning with very strong links that were coming from the government. I think this is not really the core of the issue. We don't have that, we don't expect it, but if we have a strong community enough that can do it privately, as this organization has started, I think they could do an even better job.
Yeah, although, I can add one comment, is that, these networks, these initiatives can be an answer to the question that I raised earlier, that, if you have, technology but no exits, then, you might have to look, outside, your local environment. And if you're looking outside, then, if you're looking at, for example, Silicon Valley, then, the networks assume some relevance because they can be conduits to, again, connect the technology with the market.
Yes. But this takes me next to the next question. Okay, we have given this situation, right now in Italy, something very small is moving. Meaning, for example, that one of the largest Italian banks 2 weeks ago has announced a program on venture capital, and which again it's. At least there was the word venture capital on a press release, which was something new. But my point is, okay, here in Italy we have either banks, lots of banks. Banks have been created by the Italians in the 15th century, so we can be, I don't want to say proud, but that's what we got. On the other hand, we have entrepreneurs that when have a cash bonanza, usually in Italy, they don't invest it in venture capital. They just buy properties. I was talking to one of them a few weeks ago who just had a real big cash bonanza. And I was asking him, I was telling him, okay, in a few weeks' time I will be there talking about these things. Would you ever be interested in an investment in a venture capital? And his answer was straight, no, not at all. With properties I have a safe return, and that's my business. I know it. I'm 75 years old. I don't want to get involved into these techie things for you youngsters. And so given this situation, and given that money has to come from somewhere, Randy, what do you think that the role that banks can play for to develop venture capital?
Well, leading up to the question, there was a lot that you said, and I can't help but quickly just add something about angel investing, because in ideally, of course, that 75-year-old gentleman who hopefully isn't in the room would be at least investing a prudent amount of his gains, his capital, back into entrepreneurial Italy, to give back to the community what he himself got, and helping young entrepreneurs in Italy grow and thrive just like he did, presumably. That's the way the angel system works in the United States. It's increasingly working that way in other markets. An important fact, you had raised the venture capital statistics earlier in your opening remarks, and it's often not understood or not widely publicized that in the United States, angel investing equals venture capital investing. So if there is, let's say last year, $20 billion invested, which is more or less correct, $20 billion invested by venture capitalists into early stage companies, well, there was an equal sum, $20 billion invested by angel investors. That's more or less been tracking for the past 5 years, perhaps over the past 12 months. Obviously, there's going to be some impact, but more or less that tracks. So it's very important to understand that angels are a critical component on the continuum of capital formation. So the venture capitalists depend on the angel investors who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of investing in the enterprises, the very early stages, where the venture capitalist really doesn't like the risk profile. The angel will get involved. They'll move it up to the venture capitalist, and it goes up from there. So that's not addressing your question. You had asked about banking. Another important point in our country, and really, I can only speak about the United States because I don't have any knowledge really of Italy. But in our country, banks don't invest in venture capital, generally speaking. They're not prohibited from doing so. They just, generally speaking, don't invest in private equity or venture capital. They do so in a very tiny, tiny amount. And however, there is very recent research that is indicating to us that the role of banks in the entrepreneurial ecosystem is greater than we had previously liked to believe. And what I mean by this is that the number one form of financing for an entrepreneur in the United States is a mortgage, a second mortgage on his home. So first and foremost, the entrepreneur is starting with him or herself, looking at what are their assets that they can leverage to finance their business. The vast majority of Inc. 500 fastest growing enterprises in the United States started with less than $50,000. So where they get that $50,000, credit cards and or second mortgages on their homes. Now again, this is previous perhaps to September 2008. I'm not talking about modern day. We don't know what's happening actually at this very moment, but that's been the trend for many years. That's point one, because there's again that connection to the banks, the ability to get the second mortgage, the ability to use the credit cards. But then a different scenario for those enterprises that are already started, that are beyond, that are already operational and that have revenue. The banks play an important role in terms of relationship banking. If you, it may not mean anything to you to learn that in the United States we have 8,000 banks. I'm not talking branches. I'm talking banking institutions, banking licenses, 8,000 different banking companies. And banks in the United States are SMEs. They are entrepreneurial pursuits. Oftentimes, community banks are formed by a small group of entrepreneurs. Those entrepreneurs run the bank. So when Mr. Joe or Mr. Marco entrepreneur comes into the bank and wishes a loan, that person is dealing with a owner of the bank, not a branch manager, and with the owner, they're developing a relationship. The owner knows this person, can trust the person, is not relying on necessarily a credit report. They're having a relationship, and he's making the lending decision based on that. So it's a long answer to your question. It touched on the angels, it touched on the banking, and I don't know how that translates into usefulness for Italy, but it gives you some ideas of what's happening in the United States.
I just wanted to add something, just to make sure that everybody understood here. He said that the vast majority of American entrepreneurs, the first thing that they do to fund their business is that they do the self-funding. Si fanno un mutuo sulla casa, just to make sure that everybody gets it, right? So the approach to the risk is clear right there, right? So of course it's easier than to get, to convince third parties to invest, no matter if they're banks are not, whose job is not to invest into risky business, but to third parties. If you see that you believe that much in the project, in the dream that you have, that you can change your future, you open a new mortgage to your home, right? So I think this is key to what we were discussing in the beginning, the mindset. It's even more important than the financial opportunities are right here. The second thing I wanted to add is that though in Italy, do see in the last 4, 5, 6 years way more activities starting on the seed funding, professional seed funding. Right. So I think now the general knowledge is that if you're looking to start a business, a special technology business that can grow big, you don't go to a bank, which is already something new in Italy. You go and hopefully you go and look for the guys that are sitting here. They will be able to help you packaging the idea. This is the big gap that we're missing here in Italy. It's not the big money to go to round B, C, D, et cetera, is to package the nice ideas, the good IP that can be there in a way that can be transformed into a business case. That's one thing that I do see actually coming more and more.
And why do you think we are missing on that?
I think it's cultural. I mean, we don't. there are a number of reasons. It's cultural first. We don't know how to. We don't have role models. That's one thing why we're trying to put as many role models as possible. People that have done it and they show you. To have success, I did this and that. Those were my mistakes. I did my mistakes, but I'll learn from them, and that's how I think that I can teach you how to go to the next step. Just this morning, I had at least 3 people that think they have a great idea, but they don't have the courage to start because they think, I don't know if I'm good enough to do this. So that's the one thing that is missing. Somebody say, okay, you can try. This is the guy that did this, and he's just a total normal guy. They just did it, right? So because he had approach to a risk that was different. So to create this role modeling, so somebody that you can get in touch with that can help you in a very basic stuff. That can be then a professional, it can be an incubator. That is really capital.
But I would just really quite quickly like to add, in particular, for the journalists in the room, I'm shocked about this news that, that Bing was created, Microsoft's Bing was created by an Italian. I have to say I didn't know that, and it seems to me that not many Italians perhaps know that. And so where are the journalists who should really be, I realize that journalists have to report the news, but it's awfully newsworthy that an Italian is behind Bing, and where are the journalists in terms of holding up heroes? Granted, he's not an entrepreneur, but he should be a hero. That's very important news, and I'm not sure whether the journalists are really holding up role models and heroes as they should.
Yeah, if I can defend my category, often the journalist sees the story. Often the journalist sees the story, he says, oh my God, I love it. Then he goes to his editor-in-chief, who's 75 years old, and he just says, sorry, who cares? We got the lotto numbers here, let's give them the lotto numbers. You see what I mean? Here we have a big problem of generation struggle here. It's quite strong. It's one of the major problems right now.
Lotto is bingo.
Yes, lotto is bingo.
Yeah,
yes,
and one thing that I notice also as an outsider, when we look at Italian news from outside, from California, unfortunately there seems to be a lot of search into sensational type of news, especially about the United States, almost like tabloid-like coverage, but the serious issues are ignored, and I think that's that goes to what Randy was saying. But also a quick comment on what was discussed earlier. I don't think you can blame banks for not investing in startups, and also you can't expect the angels to pour a lot of money right now into startups, because again I think the real issue is the limited exit opportunities that exist today. In America, in Silicon Valley, the whole angel investing and venture capital investing cycle is fueled by a lot of large companies that acquire the startups. Unless you can, over here, unless you can make, those companies understand the importance of acquiring technology, and you can create a pipeline of M&A activity, it's going to be very hard then, for investors to put their own money into startups. So I can't blame the 75-year-old guy for, putting money in real estate. I would probably do the same here in Italy.
I'm going to disagree with you just slightly. Sorry, and I know you're probably trying to make a point, but I think just slightly the angels that I know of, and I actually raised about $3.5 million from angel investors for my last enterprise. Oftentimes, angels are not necessarily in it for the exit. Ultimately, they'd love to have an exit, but oftentimes they're in it for the intrinsic value of giving back and working with the entrepreneur because they like the experience. And I know plenty of Silicon Valley angels who also like that experience. Again, they're not doing it for free. They do want a return, but I think that there's room here. In terms of angels getting involved in the early stage funding of Italian startups. Granted, it doesn't have to be the gentleman who's 75. Let him own his property. But certainly the other entrepreneurs who are in the room today who are already successful or who are going to soon be successful, please think about investing in Italian entrepreneurs. I would also like to quickly interject, and this is probably just as good a time as any, as an outcome of today's event. We've been talking to Tommaso Manola, and hopefully you're in the room. If There he is. And we've been discussing bringing over, as a part of the Mind to Bridge Foundation, this will come as news to you, as part of the Mind to Bridge Foundation in cooperation with Tommaso, is to bring a group from the Angel Capital Education Foundation in the United States to do an Angel Capital workshop as an outcome of today's event. And so, Richard, if you're watching this by live feed or the video, you'll know that this is an outcome and you can be proud of it. And we're going to work on that together to enhance further angel investing in Italy.
Well, that's awesome, and that touches upon what I think is also an issue. I mean, exit is an issue everywhere.
Yes.
It's an issue everywhere. Is an issue in U.S. right now. It is an issue in Silicon Valley, when the core of this technology is right now. But the good news there is that for local investment, not necessarily the exit has to be local. That's why we're in a global market. So that's what we're trying also to achieve, not just on entrepreneurs, but in the fact that if we're trying to make businesses that are global, you look for the exit wherever there are opportunities. That's why it makes sense to start from the beginning on being global, right? And not to be focused on your local market from the get-go.
Right. Yes. I think that's exactly also what Mind the Bridge does. That it gives the entrepreneurs a way, to broaden the horizon and expand the exit opportunities beyond the domestic market.
Yes. May I share an idea? At some point I want to share an idea, but I can wait.
No, you don't have to wait.
It'll be very quick about it. It's an idea for you all to consider in the room and for the management here of Mind and Bridge Foundation. There's been a successful program out of the United Kingdom where a group, an angel group in the UK, funding early stage technology companies, partnered with a angel group, organized angel group in the United States. It happened to be in Washington, D.C., and they created together what's called the Seraphin Fund. And it's angels in the Washington, D.C., mid-Atlantic states investing in early-stage UK-based technology companies, and obviously UK angels investing together. The idea being that as those UK companies enter the United States, the US-based angels are there to help them. And the model has been working now for about 2 years, so it's still early to say whether it's truly successful, but it's an interesting model that's been approved at the EC level, and you might want to consider that in terms of maybe an Italian angel group in Silicon Valley matching up with an angel group here in Italy to fund companies cooperatively. Just an idea.
Plenty of questions for you guys, but before going ahead, I would like to check with the audience if the audience has questions. If not, I go ahead with my questions. Any? Okay. About the last point, what you were saying, I'm going to read you out what the LS column on the Financial Times said on a few months ago, because one of the problems, the exit problem, is also how to actually, it seems that there are two different sets of problems. The first problem is to actually get the money for startups, and the second problem is when the startup is up and running, when it's successful, when it's profitable, whether to actually sell it away to a big group, or how to turn this startup in itself into a big group. And the last column, the Financial Times was asking this question about what is going on in the UK. It says in the UK, startups are more likely to sell to a global powerhouse than to become one, and that's one of the problems we have to address here in our venture capital industry, according to the next column. So, how can we sort out these two different sets of problems? Once the startup is up and running, how can then we can avoid to just sell it to the next American company, but because here in Europe we have a big lack of technological companies, you see what I mean? And so how can we then take our successful startups into a second step? You see what I mean?
Yeah, you want me to answer? Yeah, I think it's not a problem, it's a good thing actually, because if you, as Marco was saying, if you look at exit in two ways, you can have a domestic exit or an international exit. It's not a problem to have an international exit because you give a way out to the, let's say, Italian angels who invested in a technology startup that then gets sold to a U.S. Large company. But if you do want to maintain the exit domestically, then the key is to make sure that the larger domestic companies are more sensitive about the importance of technology acquisition. So right now I see in Italy a lot of quote unquote technology companies. They really are system integrators or service integrators. But if you're really looking at true technology, it's very hard to find large Italian companies that are acquiring them. So I think the key is to make sure that those companies that we have here, which there are really made sensitive about the importance of technology M&A, and that's something that if I may say, with BAIA Italy, we're going to try to promote next year as part of the initiatives of the organization.
Marco?
I think this morning we heard from the panel of entrepreneurs that was a question that they themselves made. So people that had their good exit years ago, they do it for passion. So their call was, why don't we do it as a group, right? So why don't we pool our success and again circulate our success, not to buy real estate, but maybe to start building an ecosystem that as a bigger pie. So I think that's the only way to do it, and it's good to aggregate people so that you can put them in a spot, because of what they said today, we take it for as a call that's going to happen. And the other thing is to create the idea how the Italian Angel for Growth, for example, started was pretty much like this. So let's put together a group of people that have interest in investing, and let's find models that can work as a community of people, not just as a single investors.
And okay, we have now basically we have touched the three points around which venture capital moves, and I would like to get deeper into one single point, which is the role of governments, actually, because you said before we don't need it. We don't need the state officials around the Silicon Valley helping us. We use our own strengths, and that's what. And I agree.
Don't quote me, because here it's all recorded. I was saying my point was that we can. I mean, considering how the situation is, we have two options. You can spend your time criticizing and what is not working, or you can pull out your sleeves and start doing what you think is a good option, is a good second option. So that's what I think we have done and we've been doing.
But I agree entirely with your. But there is something that I found very interesting in the U.S. Talking about the role of governments, because here in Italy, for example, you read many times about local authorities getting involved in venture capital, regions, and so on. And in the U.S. there is a model that is it's called SBIR, United States Small Business Innovation Research Program. Yeah. And that is one of the successful government's programs, and which is basically unknown outside the U.S. And I would like to ask Randy if you can tell us the way it works, and whether this model is something that can also be used somewhere else.
Absolutely. To start off with, I think it can be used elsewhere. And briefly, what we have here is the government acting in a venturesome way with entrepreneurs and innovators, inventors, startups. What happened many years ago, I don't remember the dates, but basically the federal government recognized that they were not getting the innovations that they needed, whether it's the Department of Defense or Health and Human Services or National Academies of Science, whatever was needed. They realized that they weren't being exposed to the most innovative ideas. And so they created this program, which, again, Small Business Innovation Research Grant. And they are grants, but they're, in essence, seed funds for these entrepreneurs or innovators, inventors who are tinkering in their garages. What happens is that there's about 11 or 12 bureaus of the government who have research and development budgets of more than $100 million a year, are obligated to allocate 2.5% of their research and development toward this program called SBIR. And what happens is that all of these individual agencies identify what they believe their future needs are. So they signal to the entrepreneurs, to the inventors, what are future needs. And so the entrepreneurs, the inventors, come up with ideas to present to the federal government to address these needs. And the first level is, because there are 3 milestone levels, the first level is $100,000 to simply develop it, perhaps maybe prove the concept a bit. Once you reach that milestone level, the next round, I believe, I could be wrong here, is $500,000. And at this point, what's happening is that by reaching the second milestone level, you're signaling to the venture capital community that you have something that is potentially backable. And, oh, by the way, it might be that your first customer is the federal government. And so this is a strong signal to the venture capital community because the government has believed in what you're doing so far. If they go to the third milestone, which is $750,000, many times the inventor doesn't actually have to go to that level because at that point either he or she has reached the venture capital funding to take it further, or there's no model, and the business just goes, whatever the business was to be, goes by the wayside, and it just simply collapses right there. So there's 2 points there. Is this SBIR, which is absolutely, I think, replicable in the Italian system, with what little I know about your system, I apologize. But secondly, is this idea of procurement. And I'll just quickly add to that, it's not directly related, but in some ways it is. And that is, in the United States, there's a regulation that 23% of all procurement from the federal government must come from small and medium-sized enterprises. And so what happens here is that first of all, it's a tremendous business opportunity for the small business because they're selling to the federal government, but also because it's a signaling again to the venture capitalist and or other corporate buyers that the federal government believes in this company. And so I'll end this particular answer with an interesting story. I was in Ottawa about 8-9 months ago, and there were just a forum like this, and there were entrepreneurs, very successful entrepreneurs in the room, Canadian entrepreneurs, and very well known in Canada. And I asked them, at what point in your business development had you sold into the U.S. federal government? And both entrepreneurs answered that they had done so within 3 years. I asked them when they had sold into the Canadian government, and they said after 9 years. So the point is that first of all, it's a lesson for you entrepreneurs in the room to think about the U.S. government as a client, as a customer of your products, your services, your innovations. That's number one. But number two is the power of the procurement system of the government and what they're buying. And if the Italian state government is not buying all that it can from SMEs, it should be.
It's yeah, you should. It's I don't know how much time we got.
4 until 5.
5 minutes. Okay. So I will go ahead with my last questions again. If I see no hands up, Marco, what you were saying before about that survey on the possibility to control your future, there is another data which I would like to discuss with you, which is the data coming from, and it talks basically about something similar, the data coming from the OECD, which shows that 50% of the salary of an Italian worker in the age of his 30s is made upon the positions of his parents, of his relatives. So half of your wealth depends on the wealth of your family. As in Denmark, this rate goes down to 15%. And these data are usually used in order to show that our social mobility is very, very low. In Italy, if you are the son of a lawyer, you tend to be a lawyer. If you are the son of a doctor, you tend to be a doctor, and so on. Talking from this point of view, meaning that we need much more mobility, and your initiative goes towards exactly in this direction. Before you said, you used the expression changing the ecosystem. What else do you think we could do actively to change the ecosystem over here?
So the statistics that you pointed is very hard to handle in general. First, I'm not an expert in social sciences, but there is one thing. I was attending a conference last two weekends ago in Rimini, and one of the speakers was Minister Meloni, the Minister of Youth. She was mentioning actually data that struck me, and that's the following. Here, this time, our generation of Italians is the first generation that is finding a world that is worse than the one of the previous generation. So it's the first generation ever in the history of this country where the new generation is more in trouble than the previous generation. So, and that's again something that is historical, is something that is really affecting the mindset of the core of the new society. So that adds to your point, adds to your statistics. There are no easy solutions. I think this is we're a tough time. You can put it in a different way, but this is a country that is late for its future. The one thing that I would give as a modest comment is we spend too much time criticizing what is not working, and there are plenty of things that are not working. It's worth criticizing, but maybe we should concentrate just a tiny bit of our time, of our energy, instead in building things. You know, everybody has a talent. Everybody knows is better than somebody else in doing something. If we should, as a approach to things to do, if we could spend a little more time in investing, in try to do a little bit better what we can do, and everybody can do something, I think we'll be in a better situation.
And following up on that, Matteo, you, like Marco, I guess you spend your nights working for BAIA. I mean, during the day you got your own job. Sure. And so in the evenings or in the nights, instead of going to theater or a movie, you stay there.
Oh, you can tell from our face. We're actually 29 years old.
Yeah. And so how do you fund an organization like yours? Where do you get the means actually to carry it on? Do people have to pay to join it?
No, basically the way it works, it's a volunteer-driven organization. It's besides the founders, there is a board of directors composed by 8 persons, and then there is a governance of about 20 people who are involved in the day-to-day organizational tasks and being like events or other activities. And then we have, anybody can become a member to the online, social network. It's free. However, we also have options for supporters, and individuals can be supporters, and companies can be supporters in different degrees. But it's all, volunteer-driven and donation-driven. And that, again, is in the spirit of the, free market, Silicon Valley mindset.
But in one of your interviews, you say that in this kind of professional networks, those who get in just to take things get sidelined. It must be about this.
It's more a do, and then you would see, if you get things back. Basically, in the culture of Silicon Valley, in a network, first of all, you need to contribute information and knowledge. And then only if that's also a way by which you establish that you can provide value. And then, once, other people in the network see that you can give value to the network, then you receive back. So it's an efficient way to promote, business development, but it's not done, on an individualized platform, but it's done within an organization. The network itself also provides an efficient systems of checks and balances, because if somebody's in the network only to take, then the person is going to be sidelined. So number one is, to give, give time, give contacts, give information, and then, when people see the value of that information, you get things back. And of course, it works on in certain types of economies. It works in Silicon Valley because it's a knowledge, based ecosystem. So it's not about really products. It's about ideas and knowledge.
1 more minute, do you have? One. Because Randy wanted to...
Just a few words. I think it's back to the words that Marco last said in terms of building things, and I think it's a nice segue into just my closing remarks, which would be that I'm here as a guest of the Mind the Bridge Foundation to build bridges. And so I'm here this evening. I'll be here all day tomorrow. I would encourage any of the entrepreneurs in the room or anyone in the room to approach me. That's why I'm here. I would welcome engaging in conversations, as I've already done today with a number of entrepreneurs in the room. I would like to be able to help you, connect you with U.S. venture capitalists, perhaps give you some insights about the U.S. market. Whatever I can do, I'm happy to do it. And one final thing I would just say, and I would be remiss not to say it, is that I can't help but look around the room and feel like I need to say that for the Mind the Bridge Foundation, perhaps one of the targets would be to encourage greater entrepreneurship amongst women in Italy as well. Because I really am looking around, and all of you men, it's nice to see you, yes, but I'm looking where are the women entrepreneurs, and it's a very important aspect and an opportunity for Italy as well.
Yeah, I can't agree more. So
Okay.
more women here in the room, please.
Okay.
Marco, last question, it must be for you. It's, first of all, do your daughters understand when you spend the whole evening in front of a computer instead of playing with them because of the Mind the Bridge?
So if
Do your daughters understand you since that you spend all this time doing something else instead of looking after them?
No, they don't, but they understand how to manage Skype. So
Which is already...
Very good.
Where do you think... do you know already where next year you will take Mind the Bridge?
Oh, we don't know. Just let's finish today and tomorrow, and then let's give us 4 or 5 years of vacation, and then we can talk.
Okay. Many thanks then.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.